Jesus,
while we're here.
blimey, Suj.
No, we can't do that.
No, I don't think we can. Don't leave that in.
Yeah, of course not. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
Carry on. How many of these have you done? My name's James. Hello, everyone.
Tuesday is a people's poll day, although whenever the word FIFA gets mentioned, I feel like it's a money in football day because you can't have a conversation about FIFA without talking about the cashola. But people's poll today. James, do you want to give us the topics and what one? I've given a kind of a leak there, haven't I?
Yeah, there was landslide victory on this, which I was quite surprised about because there were three very different options. So one was a nostalgic look back at Australia's victory against England in 2003, which was Wayne Rooney's England debut when he was still a baby at Upton Park. Francis Jeffers scored for England. I won money that night gambling on Australia, actually. True story. That's 20 years on from obviously the two nations meet on Fridays. I thought that might be nice. Another option we put in was a few people had said to me, when are you going to do something on Sheffield Wednesday? Because the owner, Deshfon Chansiri, I could probably just read some of his statements over the last 12 months and that would be a podcast in itself. Difficult times for Wednesday fans who are trying to push their owner out, and he's different, let's say. I think that's a conversation we'll revisit. But the winner of the people's poll vote, and it's very apt with this morning's announcement as well, which we knew was going to come at some point today, was the awarding of the international tournaments by UEFA and FIFA specifically between the years of 2028 and 2034. UEFA has this morning confirmed that the UK and Ireland joint bid for Euro 2028 has been successful, and also announced that Italy and Turkey will joint host Euro 2032. This follows on from FIFA's announcement of 2030 World Cup hosted by 6 teams across 3 continents. I had to check myself there, and what that potentially means about the bidding process for 2034 World Cup. So this kind of splits into 2 parts: what's happened with UEFA and what's happening with FIFA.
Indeed.
Should we start with football's coming home?
Yes, since it's 96, isn't it? Since last time we...
Well, it kind of feels like we feel like we had the tournament
a
little while ago, obviously during COVID, Euro 2020. The fact that both semi-finals, the final was here, all of England's games bar one was played at Wembley, kind of feels like it was here, but didn't also because of under COVID restrictions, etc. So... yeah, we're old enough to remember Euro 96.
Indeed.
I am, so you must be.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And that was, I think, a major boost for football in this country, the formation of the Premier League in 1992. So then Euros kind of, after that, absolutely exploded from 1996 onwards. And that obviously had a major impact in terms of refurbishment of many stadiums in this country, obviously off the back of the Taylor report, obviously following the disaster at Hillsborough in 1989 as well. Coming into this one will be very, very different. And of course, it's not just England football's coming home. Our friends from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are also joint hosting the tournament. And it got me thinking, actually, with the Euros now being 24 teams, and obviously the World Cup's going up to 48 teams in the future as well. If the tournaments that we've seen or about to see, such as Germany just hosting Euro 2024 that's coming up, if you think that's kind of going to be in the past and we're going to get more of this, I mean, we've got 2026 in USA, Canada, Mexico's 3 nations, 2028 is going to be 5 nations, 2030 is going to be 6 nations. Is this where this is going?
Well, clearly.
Because it's so big.
Yep. FIFA and UEFA, I mean, I'll come back to the money in football stem. They will do whatever they can to maximise the reach of the tournament for commercial reasons.
You cynic, who's
for commercial
absolutely
reasons.
Correct.
So having it in more countries definitely means more eyeballs. Whether or not that's logistically better for the tournament and better for fans, they couldn't care, could they? So I think the UK and Ireland is probably geographically quite a closely spaced tournament, really, relative to now. I think if you can get from anywhere to anywhere with a 3 or 4 hour train maximum, I think that's okay. As soon as you start talking about having to take flights in the middle of a tournament to watch your team, I think it becomes...
I just think train from London to Glasgow is what, 4 hours maybe?
Yeah, direct.
3.5,
maybe.
4 hours.
Yeah, not
Catch
much
a
more than
fast
that.
one, I think. Yeah. And that's what we're talking in terms of the land of between obviously England and Scotland. London to Cardiff is roughly 3 hours, I think,
by train. Well, it wouldn't surprise me. The drive is 2.5, so...
How would you get Belfast to take a bit longer?
That's
though,
the plane.
You've got a... It doesn't have to be.
No, but I think if you're going to the Republic or Northern Ireland, you'd want to fly, but it's a short flight.
You've got to cross water.
Yeah.
Ryanair will be mad popular, won't it?
Yep.
2028 be all over that. You can get a boat as well, though.
Yeah.
But probably, from London, I would imagine you're flying. So, I mean, look, when we consider 2026 World Cup's going to be across USA, Canada and Mexico, you're going
to have to fly.
The UK and Ireland bid, yes. In terms of land, if you will, it's probably a smaller, I guess, square mile radius to Germany. It's probably less, isn't it? I think.
If you then cast your minds back to Qatar, that's probably the smallest kind of area spread that a tournament will maybe ever be, realistically. So that was one advantage of the most recent tournament. Everybody was pretty much in one city or one kind of location.
Look, it's great that it's coming home. It'll be great. It's obviously a huge boost to obviously the economy here, etc. In terms of overseas visitors, and obviously just the boost massively.
I remember '96 with really positive memories, and it helps that England did well. But I do kind of feel like pre-tournament it was what will happen, because football still has a reputation. Football fans, let's say, still have a bit of a reputation. But I feel like Euro '96 was a real positive experience of having the tournament.
Yes,
in the UK.
but then the final against Italy here was not.
That's very true.
And we have to balance that and
very
say
true.
that. And that was potentially something that was going to be harming to this bid. I have noted with a little bit of humour some of the announcements today of why the UK and Ireland bid has been successful and all the reasons why. And they said there was no competition.
Well, that's it.
Once Turkey,
it was an uncontested.
There was some speculation about bids from Turkey. Obviously, were involved, and they've obviously decided to join the Italy bid for 2032, which they've now got. Turkey been after a European Championship for many years, actually. There was speculation of a joint bid from the Scandinavian nations, but that never particularly came to light. So it's been inevitable. This morning's announcement is not a shock to anybody. That's why I don't think anybody's really celebrating, because we've known for a while that it was a formality, basically. England don't automatically qualify, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to automatically qualify 5 nations.
I mean,
that's a quarter of the tournament almost.
We have to piss it up the wall not to qualify. There's a suggestion that they'll do a maximum of 3 spots for host nations for a tournament, which I think, to be honest, England and Scotland should probably just let the other 3 qualify.
Yeah.
Because I think Scotland are the strongest other nation at the moment. And to be honest, with England, even if they piss it up in the group, you've got the knock-on fallback of the Nations League playoffs and stuff. So it's very difficult not to qualify for Euros. It would be a shame if the 5 nations weren't all a part of this tournament.
Yeah.
So there's a few talks going to be happening with that. There is some suggestion that there'll be 2 security spots, but it doesn't guarantee that all 5 of the nations will definitely be part of a tournament. That would be a real shame.
Yeah, that's one of my dislikes with the way that these tournaments get split up, is that if you don't have the hosts,
The 6 nations that are sharing 2030 are all guaranteed.
Right.
But that's not the case for the 2028, despite the fact near enough 50% of the continent qualifies, actually. And there's a number of teams that, unfortunately, because of their size, have got absolutely no chance. So, I mean, just your average nation's probably got sort of 50-60% chance of qualifying.
And the UK is a bit of a unique situation where you've got England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland as 4 separate teams, which under technically what is one country. So, that's I think a bit of a rare scenario. I always wonder, James, what your thoughts are. Like, most people are pretty vocal against FIFA's crazy ideas, which they do come up with from time to time. I don't see the nations particularly moaning about the fact that a lot of these tournaments are now spread over more than one country. Do you think the countries themselves actually care, or do you think it's actually in their interests as well to say we're splitting a bit of the risk here? It's not necessarily that we have to take the entire tournament on, because you do hear sometimes situations where nations have taken on things like the Olympics, and they don't actually make any money on it. I know the Olympics is quite a different commercial kettle of fish compared to the World Cup. I feel like the World Cup would generate far more money than an Olympics potentially.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I'd have to look into that.
Many, like we've seen it with Brazil and other places, that when they take on the Olympics, it's actually a bit of a problem. So whether or not countries actually are on board with FIFA trying to spread it and splitting them over multiple countries.
I think there's two ways of looking at this. I think the traditionalists like me would like a tournament to be in one nation, or kind of a maximum of two, i.e. if one's not big enough, for example. So
Spain and Portugal is a good example.
Let's be honest. Yeah, well, Spain could absolutely.
Spain could, but
Portugal,
Portugal maybe you?
Portugal had the Euros in 2004, which was 4 stadium, maybe 6, I think, but it was primarily the two Lisbons and obviously Porto. Probably maybe couldn't do it on their own now. Spain absolutely.
Spain could, obviously,
unquestionably. Like Spain don't need Portugal. Probably
Portugal needs Spain.
But that's
Portugal always going to be the case. The smaller nations are going to need to piggyback off the bigger nation.
For example, Wales obviously would need help, right, to host a tournament. Yep. You've got Cardiff, Swansea. I'm probably sure the racecourse ground in Wrexham will become bigger in future years, and obviously you've got the Principality Stadium. There's not enough to host a tournament. Perhaps in previous eras, Scotland might have been, in the sense of you've got obviously Celtic, Rangers, Hampden Park, but you'd need, I think, the game up there to have growth to be able to. You'd want the likes of Tynecastle, Hearts, Easter Road, Hibernian, Pittodrie, Aberdeen, Tannadice, Dundee United. Those stadiums would all need to be bigger than what they currently are, and they're not getting filled out necessarily every week as it stands anyway. I know for a couple of those clubs that generally is the case, but they're not big enough to host UEFA tournament football.
Yep.
But it wouldn't be a million miles off, actually. So, yeah, I totally get it that there's certain nations obviously do need assistance and they have the right to host these. And there is a thought process, I think, of through football at the moment is want to give nations as much possibility and chance as possible to be able to host tournament football. And I get that. This does primarily, when you look at the stadiums, though, does look like an England tournament, again, +4.
Yep.
England have 6 of the 10 selected stadiums. I think there's a case to have more stadiums, by the way, but there's only one each from the 4 other nations. So obviously the Aviva Stadium in Dublin, obvious choice.
70,000, isn't it?
A lot over there. No, I don't think it's quite that big. The Aviva 51,000
okay.
only.
Right.
It's big enough. Croke Park obviously would hold more, but I think there's the conflict there potentially with the GAA and the release of the stadium. It was used obviously when the Republic of Ireland were rebuilding Lansdowne Road, so what is now obviously called the Aviva Stadium.
Yep.
Wales have obviously got the Principality Stadium in
Millennium
Cardiff.
Stadium.
It's now called the Principality, but a lot of us.
But for people of my age, James, who remember Euro '96, James,
just under 74,000.
Yeah.
We think that's probably going to host the opening game.
Okay.
Scotland's Hampden Park, which I think a few people are not happy with, arguably Parkhead or Ibrox, without upsetting either fan base, there might have been a better selection. But obviously, as the FA Stadium, it was obviously going to get called up as the selection. Northern Ireland's currently doesn't exist. And it's quite an interesting one. I think it's a story that probably wants the following. So Windsor Park, the national stadium currently, just not big enough for UEFA requirements. It's been rebuilt quite nicely recently, but it's 21,000 or so. The minimum has got to be at least 30,000. So the idea is they're going to rebuild a stadium called Casement Park, which is currently, if you go looking for images on Google, you just find this derelict it was intended to be rebuilt in the early 2010s. It's still sitting there dormant. There's quite a bit of argument at the moment in terms of who's actually going to fund the rebuilding of this stadium with a target capacity of 34,000. But it will soon need to get a move on. It's 4.5 years away, roughly.
I think you need a year and a half to build a stadium.
Daniel Levy might disagree. I realise Tottenham's was quite complicated, but I suppose, once it gets moving, it'll be fine. But they do need to organise who's going to do the funding for it. And to be honest,
is that an argument between the Irish government and Northern Irish?
I think it
and
might
also the Irish
might
FA,
also be
Northern
GAA related a little bit as well in terms of who's actually going to do, because what's going to happen to the stadium afterwards.
Thing,
a little bit. So they need to sort out
the funding
for it.
We know the Northern Irish FA haven't got any money.
That was a Republic issue, wasn't it?
Was that Republic?
I think so, yeah.
Well,
that's an old podcast.
Yeah.
6 stadiums selected from England.
Let me guess, Wembley.
Oh, do you not know the stadiums?
No, I'm going to say Wembley.
Oh, well done, Brett.
Spurs.
Round of applause. Yes, Super Spurs.
Villa Park.
Yes, Villa Park.
Old Trafford.
No.
City.
Yes.
Okay, I'm surprised by that.
We can come back to that.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4 I've named. St James's?
Yes.
To spread it out that way. And then South Coast. Maybe some...
Nope.
No.
No, up north. Not finished yet.
So Everton's new place.
Yep. Bramley Moor Dock, yeah.
Is that what they're going to call it? Bramley Moor Stadium or something?
I don't know what officially it'll be. I suppose eventually it'll have a sponsor, won't it?
Yeah, sure.
That's in. And to be honest, these stadium announcements are not a surprise either. This was kind of all submitted as the intended 10 stadiums quite a while ago when the final bid was submitted. So none of those choices should come as a surprise. It's a nice one for my club because when you look at London in itself, I mean...
There's so many stadiums.
I mean, in theory, could London host the European Championship
easily
with Wembley, Tottenham, Arsenal, West Ham,
Chelsea,
Stamford Bridge... Steve Parish's expansion of Selhurst Park.
Yeah, and I mean, if you
knock down the Arthur
game,
Waite stand, mate, with respect to Arthur Waite.
You could happily use Brentford's place for smaller games, maybe.
It's not big enough. It's not big enough.
You still don't think for like group stage games?
No, it's got to be, that legislation's got to be minimum 30,000.
Wow, okay.
Has to be.
Fair play.
So,
I mean, if we wanted to bleed into Twickenham and stuff like that, you know, if you really wanted to keep it in London, you could.
Yes, you could.
Branch out into other sports.
So that's interesting, isn't it? We're talking about multi-use countries for stadiums, and we've got a city that could...
It's got some of the best.
Could do it, couldn't it? I mean,
sure.
Chelsea obviously eventually want to do some form of expansion for Stamford Bridge. Arsenal and West Ham are both over 60. Tottenham's obviously over 60. You got Wembley at 90.
Yep.
I mean,
Twickenham 70.
Stamford Bridge, Twickenham. You could get away with a 6. One stadium for each group, and then
you need
work
to email
away from
Sadiq Khan, James, Mayor of London. Say, why don't we bid as a city?
You would need more. But if you ended up expanding further, something like a Craven Cottage or something, then sure. I think maybe even at the Valley wouldn't be a million miles off, perhaps, as well. In any case, those are the stadiums. For my club, as said, is nice. I would want to get tickets for games being played at Tottenham. There's no known at the moment if England will move around the country or not. Obviously, in '96, it was very much designed that England would stay at Wembley as long as they won the group. I don't know if there might be a bit more of movement around the country, which would feel nice, but I think Wembley does feel like an advantage when it is a home nation tournament as well, when you can obviously have 90,000 of your own there, etc.
No surprise that Leaky Roof City, Manchester, Old Trafford hasn't got the nod ahead of
no.
City.
Part of the problem with Old Trafford, though, and it's obviously
leaking roof.
It's been well documented about infestation of rodents and leaking roofs, etc. at Old Trafford. But the real reason, truly, that Old Trafford, bless you, Suj, has not been chosen as one of the stadiums is because they couldn't confirm that they wouldn't necessarily rebuild the stadium before the event. So there's obviously talks underway now at Manchester United to try and feasibility studies, if you will. Is it complete demolition? Is it rebuild? What they're going to do with it? And obviously with this tournament happening in 5 years, a little bit less, they couldn't commit to say that Old Trafford wouldn't be in the middle of a rebuilding process,
That's
for
fair.
example. Yeah. So for that reason, more than the roof and stuff like that, it had to get left out. Everton brand new stadium is obviously going to be capacity similar to Anfield, so I understand why it's got the nod. Villa Park was the obvious one in the Midlands. And I think, to be honest, although location and accessibility of Tottenham Stadium is not as good as the Emirates or the London Stadium, it had to be chosen. I know that's a biased opinion, but
I mean, it's a newer stadium.
It should have it. The thinking at the moment is that Wembley will probably have the semi-finals and the final.
Yeah.
the knock-on of obviously Turkey pulling out of the run-in for the tournament, and obviously the UK and Ireland getting it, is that they've joined in with Italy for 2032. Do you know how many countries should you have to drive through to get from Italy to Turkey?
So that's if you're driving, not if you're just jumping on a boat. Because a boat would be none.
That's very good, yeah, but you can get a boat from Italy to here and go through none.
But it's not as big a journey. I'm going to suggest 4.
Well, I think the minimum you can do, I think, is 3.
Right.
You could probably get through Slovenia, Serbia and Bulgaria before you got towards Istanbul and
But
Turkey.
I think they're working with the assumption the majority of people will fly.
Are we all right with this, though?
What, Italy and Turkey
But I'm not
together?
even. What I mean is, they're not even bordering. You look at USA, Canada, Mexico. They're all bordering each other. Is that?
It's not that far, is it? Italy to Turkey. It's a what, hour flight, hour and a half?
It's enough, isn't it? You got enough countries in between it.
Yeah. I don't particularly have too much of a problem with it, but I feel like it'll be a case of Turkey will get a bit of the group stages and maybe one quarter-final, and then the rest will all be in Italy. It depends to what extent they're splitting the games between the two of them. But
Not necessarily.
I don't think
in terms of
they'll all be in Turkey.
Well, Turkey's got the biggest one, the Ataturk, right?
Right.
It's like 90-odd thousand, isn't it? So technically, that's arguably where the final might be. I don't know if there's any bartering with that in the sense that, again, maybe Italy might not have needed the help in quite the same way, whereas Turkey had, as I said, have been bidding for a long time, and I think it was like, we're going to have to probably get into bed with someone here, basically, to make this happen. But Italy probably don't have the large volume of big stadiums that you might expect, right?
Some are getting rebuilt as
the Olympic Stadium in Rome is an obvious one that's obviously shared between Lazio and Roma. The San Siro is obviously incredibly iconic, but we think it's going to stay in its existence now. AC Milan have been talking about breaking away and been building their own stadium. There's been plans to rebuild Fiorentina's stadium that's been going on for a really long time, which I don't think is necessarily progressing. So, I mean, for Italy, it's good, right? Because a lot of the stadia out there needs renovating and modernising, because a lot of them have stayed kind of untouched since Italia 90, essentially. So they're going to host the tournament in 2032. I don't have a problem with either of the two nations hosting the tournament. I just think, where does that end? We start going, oh, Poland are going to like share with Portugal, and
that's a bit further.
Like where does it end?
That seems a bit too far.
It's a journey, Suj.
Yeah.
And interestingly, obviously, Greece.
I just don't think people will be doing it more than once, right? You'll either start in Italy and finish in Turkey, or you start in Turkey and finish in Italy. I don't think people will have to hop between the two. If you ever design it that way, then that's pretty bad planning.
Yeah, it just feels like a keep
Other
everyone
than for the final,
happy.
maybe.
And again, the bid's gone uncontested, so obviously it's been approved.
Yep.
And it was going to get through. Greece, obviously, were interested in potentially being part of a joint 2030 World Cup bid with Egypt and Saudi Arabia, which would have been 3 nations from 3 different continents. Again, I think we can see this sort of thing happening more. There was even speculation of Saudi Arabia being used in a joint bid with Italy, even at one point was mooted as well. And we do have this. How do we feel about this? This 2030 awarding of the World Cup, which is being defined as Spain, Portugal, and Morocco are hosts. And we have to say that Morocco is very close to Spain and Portugal.
Yep.
But
I don't think it's massively different to Italy and Turkey.
No, Morocco to Spain is not really any difference to us to Ireland, to be totally honest. Maybe even less. But you've obviously had the 3 nations thrown in from South America, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, who are each going to get 1 group game each at the start of the tournament to help mark the 100th centenary anniversary, obviously the first World Cup that was in 2030. Am I too nostalgic to have just wanted it to be in Uruguay and Argentina?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't see why it couldn't have been.
I think the problem they landed was essentially it was Europe's turn. That's how it's worked. Europe has had every 12 years. That's what part caused the problem. And the UK and Ireland were originally interested in getting 2030, but believed they were going to be well behind the Spain-Portugal bid, so adjusted their own bid to the European Championship rather than the World Cup. How do we feel about it, Suj? 3 games in South America and then play the rest of the tournament in Europe primarily and also then in Africa?
Not bothered. It's literally 3 games. I feel for the fans a little bit, particularly if you're a diehard. Let's just say England get drawn and they play in Uruguay, and then you have to make your way over to Spain. I feel for the fans a little bit, especially if you're one of those people, like I said, who's a diehard, has been to every England tournament game, and suddenly you're getting an extra 1,500 quid or whatever it is to fly to Uruguay and back for no reason for one game of football for a tournament. It feels a bit harsh, but that's a minority of fans. There's only a handful of people that are going to do that.
Is there also not seen it mentioned much? Is there a sporting integrity question here?
Why?
Well,
they've had to travel more.
One team's going to play a home game against someone, and they're going to play on a neutral venue for the next two. Someone's disadvantaged, right? Someone's got to play an away game.
Are the games in Uruguay, Argentina, etc., Argentina-Uruguay games specifically?
Yeah, of course it will be. Yeah, it's going to have to be, isn't it?
I hadn't assumed that. I hadn't made that assumption. I thought they might play like England, Germany, and Argentina or something.
No, it can't be.
It's going to have to be. In that case, yeah, sure.
It's going to be. It's going to be the host nation. Surely they're not going to just. Oh yeah, we've got Angola against Romania in Argentina for their.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue the case that Spain have an advantage because every game's at home, or Portugal, or Morocco.
You know that.
It doesn't bother me hugely, to be honest with you. I think we'll forget about it very quickly as soon as those 3 games are done. We'll forget about it. It'll always be remembered as a Spanish tournament or Spanish-Portuguese.
These great efforts they keep mentioning on things like carbon footprint and reducing these sort of things.
Well, it doesn't help.
I mean...
It doesn't help at all, James.
I just feel like this would have the tournament in South America in 2030 and give Spain and Portugal 2034 and then move it on, and maybe at some point...
Then what would Saudi do, James?
Well, at some point, give a tournament to Australia and New Zealand might be even quite nice, for example. Yeah. Now, of course, what they've done here...
They could even think about sharing with Japan or something if they wanted to, and obviously like football over there is crazy.
So
popular now.
What came with this announcement for 2030, which caught people a little bit by surprise? I think people just thought it was going to go to Spain and Portugal.
Morocco.
And Morocco, sorry, yes. What the announcement meant last week was they also announced that the bidding process would open for 2034 and that those interested in bidding would have 4 weeks to submit their intention to bid for the tournament. 4 weeks notice when the tournament's 11 years away. Oh, and by the way, because we've given the tournament to Europe, Africa, and South America, no one from those continents can bid. So even though South America's only got, I might have said South Africa, sorry, I obviously meant South America. South America have only got 3 games, but can't bid for 2034. North America can't vote because they've got 2026. This. Europe now got it. Morocco have got a piece of Africa's pie, if you will, for 2030. So it literally just leaves 2034 for Asia. The only other ones that are allowed to bid is Oceania. If Australia and New Zealand wanted to quickly, at 4 weeks' notice, put a bid together.
Why 4 weeks' notice?
Why do you think, Suj?
It's an inside job, isn't it?
Well, it doesn't even, if say China or South Korea, Japan, these sort of countries want to get involved, or perhaps even some of the large nations in Asia who perhaps are less established in the football world, if you will, the likes of India, for example, to get themselves sorted. Well, should we bid for it? It's not happening, is it?
It's not going to happen.
So you're going to have, highly likely, unless something really quickly happens with Australia and New Zealand, which we don't expect, an uncontested bid for Saudi Arabia 2034, and they know they're going to have it at sort of like 11 years in advance. We comfy with this, are we?
What difference does it make? Whether we're comfy with it or not?
We did.
I don't understand why with all these other bidding processes, people have months and months to figure out what they're going to do and put their bids together and all this kind of thing. And then all of a sudden they decided to put a timeline on it of 4 weeks.
4 weeks timeline.
Unnecessary.
At 11 years to go.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Okay.
It's not fair.
We did, call me a cynic, we did a week of podcasts based on Saudi football in Saudi Arabia, and I think we on Patreon during the summer, and I think we're quite balanced in a lot of our views actually. But one of the things we said there, it was absolute certainty that Saudi Arabia would get a World Cup in the 2030s. Certainty.
Yep. The whole thing with Qatar and PSG, kind of, it's Mark II again, isn't it? Because a lot of people were speculating in and around the Qatari World Cup that the only reason they bought PSG way back when they did was as a marketing machine for the Qatari World Cup. And as soon as the World Cup's kind of been and gone now, they're just not bothered about PSG, and eventually it'll get sold and what have you. The similarities with the Saudis buying Newcastle and also now pumping that much money into their is it called the Saudi Super League? Saudi
Pro League, maybe. Nico, what's it called?
The Saudi Pro League.
He knows because Ronaldo's in it. Of course he knows.
Of course. Yeah, I'm waiting for the day he walks into work in that yellow and blue Ronaldo shirt.
Don't do that.
So is this all marketing towards that World Cup for them?
It was part of their Vision 2030.
Sorry, Newcastle fans, I'm not poo-pooing their investment in the club and saying that they have got ulterior motives. Like genuinely, they might have the best interests at heart for Newcastle, but it's if they're working in the same way that the Qataris were towards that big tournament, then that's what it is, right? A marketing machine.
Well, I think in their case, it's the Vision 2030, isn't it? In terms of tourism into the country, etc., which obviously a World Cup will obviously massively help with that. FIFA, interestingly, also changed their stadium legislation last week with this announcement. So I've mentioned a few times about minimum capacity, 30,000. One of the rules as well in terms of previous bids for tournaments was you had to have a minimum of 7 stadiums were already established,
right?
I.e. non-new builds. They've changed that last week to it has to be a minimum of 4.
So you can build more. But even when countries commit to building the stadiums, they don't build them all. Qatar, when they won stadium short in the end.
Were they?
They didn't build the same as what they would have been required to at the bidding process.
Could they not afford it?
I'm not sure, James. I just think that it was rules that were there to deter other bidders. Maybe
Saudi Arabia have also promised, as part of their bid, a summer World Cup.
Whose summer?
Whose summer?
A European summer.
This is something I've mentioned to you a few times on a few things, because I don't actually think this isn't just a problem restricted to necessarily tournaments in Asia, as just seen with Qatar. We've seen tournaments in Africa. We had to be moved because the intention was to move the African nations to a summer tournament in line with everyone else, and it keeps happening in January, doesn't it? Part of that's because of climate and stuff. I said to you that I thought that these upcoming ones in the 2020s might be the last ones that are summer tournaments, because of the changing climate. 2030, Spain, Portugal, Morocco is potentially going to be mad hot.
It will be in the late 30s, 40s, very possibly.
At which point does it become too dangerous to play football? And of course, you can't just plan it and say, oh, well, it's going to be bloody hot that month, wait a month.
No.
This is going to be planned years in advance,
start games at 6 a.m., play in the night. But I think it'll be late 30s, early 40s comfortably at that. It can easily hit those kind of temperatures.
Some
over 35, I would say, is dangerous, but anything over 30 is.
To be honest, it's
going to ruin the spectacle. The football's going to be.
This is it, right? So, like 35, you can have your water breaks and stuff. Once you start hitting towards 40, and I think if you look at sort of temperatures in like Madrid and Seville in summers years gone by, these can hit massive high temperatures. We're talking high 40s possibly. You can't play football in that.
No,
I don't.
Impossible.
So I can foresee football international tournaments moving permanently to winter, because it's not just that one. Turkey also can have mad heat in 2030.
South Italy will be similar in terms of heat wave.
2034, Saudi Arabia, climate-wise, obviously very comparable to Qatar. Is this where football could go?
Yeah. But
does it make more sense? Because it's not just the heat and the players as well. It's also what we're watching. Do we actually want to watch the best players play each other in the world in 35-degree heat?
It will ruin the spectacle of football. I think, there's a lot to be said that it could go this way.
So are we potentially looking at November, December tournaments and football league calendar adjusting where it becomes like August to June?
Yeah.
Potentially. And then it never stops, does it? What gap?
Well, for
come back in 2 weeks for pre-season and our global trotting club.
You say August to June, but that's with a gap in the middle for the tournament, if there is an international tournament.
I mean, what was Champions League final this year? Was it June the 10th or something?
Yes, because we played our final on June the 7th.
Yeah.
So it was the Saturday after. So 10th, 11th.
It's late, isn't it?
Very.
Premier League and City would have played Community Shield? First weekend of August or so?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not much of a break, is it?
No.
I think this is a conversation that's going to come to the head with the way that obviously our climate's changing and some of these nations that are hosting tournaments. That the climate in these destinations has got to be considered.
Yep.
Even look at our summer here. Was it last year?
Yep.
We got up to 38? That's kind of like, I mean, that's too much for football. It won't be the product we want to see either. And whatever we think in terms of our reservations about the tournament being in Qatar, the majority of the football benefited from being in a cooler climate.
Yep.
And they'll know that. And I wouldn't be surprised if shit changes and the whole football calendar eventually moves. I think that's a possibility.
We shall keep an eye on it and monitor it, James. So let's see as and when. I think if the deadline is only 4 weeks away for the bids, they're going to announce it pretty much straight away. Particularly if it's an uncontested bid.
11 years. It's farcical.
If it's uncontested, then we'll know pretty soon. Do jump in the comments on YouTube with your thoughts around the tournaments and whether or not you're bothered. Is it a problem if it's across multiple continents, or will you still travel to see your nation? We'll be back at you tomorrow. Sky Fantasy Football, James.
This summer will be like, I hope we play in Argentina and then we play in Morocco and then I saw my nation play in 3 different continents in the World Cup group stage, and lose 3 times as well. Like those sort of things you can hold forever because you ticked a box.
Yeah, it won't be me.
No.
Sky tomorrow, James. You ready to go?
Are we going to Germany though?
No.
Oh.
Stay safe.
I want to go.
Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Cue music, please, man, child.